What is going on, guys? I am Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me, as always, is co-host and creator of the PigskinPapers website, Dave Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. 8 days to the start of the season, so it's exciting times. We wait a long time from the Super Bowl to the start of the season. We got the draft, the preseason, but I know, like a lot of people out there, I'm very excited for NFL football to be back. How about you, Paul?
Sir.
How are you doing tonight?
I can't complain, my friend. It's finally not 100 degrees or over 100 degrees here in Texas, so I'm happy about that. But Dave, you mentioned the season is right around the corner. I don't know if Twitter makes it better or if it makes it feel like the season's even longer away, but thank God for Twitter because we can at least talk football with each other. Where can we find you on there?
I'm on Twitter/X. I don't even know what to call that app anymore, but I'm at PigskinPapers, and my website where I post all my fantasy and NFL content is thepigskimpapers.com. Paul, where can people find you?
Yes, guys, I am Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. Well, here we are with Dave and I's final episode of our series, Divisions of Fantasy. And with the season just a week away, I'd like to think that's pretty good timing. Last week, we discussed the AFC South with Randall Memphis Young, a player profiler in the Dynasty Warzone. Be sure to check out that episode. This week, we're staying in the South, but we're moving to the NFC. Here to help us navigate a division with young, exciting, and unproven talent is longtime Falcons fan and creator of the PostSZN website and fantasy tournament. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kojo Degraft Hanson. Kojo, how are you, sir?
What's up, guys? Good to be with you.
A-Town, stay down, sir.
You know it.
Hey, Kojo, where can we find you on Twitter, man?
Oh, so we are at Play PostSZN everywhere on socials. All one word, and season is SCN.
SC or SZ?
SZN.
Okay, yeah, just making sure. All right, Kojo, let's go ahead and get after it, sir. How long have you been playing fantasy football?
Man, I got started 2006. I think I took one season off in the years since then, and that's it.
Almost 20 years, man.
Yeah. First year was the LaDainian Tomlinson, all those touchdowns year. I just luckily drafted him because I liked his visor.
It was the vibes.
I remember that season. I think he had 28 touchdowns in a 16-game season.
It was like insane.
Yeah, Go ahead, Paul.
I was just saying, sorry. I thought he had he set the record and he had over 30 for some reason, but maybe it was 28.
I don't know. We can look it up after the show. I remember I didn't have him on my fantasy team that year. He was a league winner that year, for sure. So, yes, Kojo, indeed. Tell us about the postseason. Where'd you get the idea for it, and how did you put it together?
Yeah, so the postseason is basically a way to play fantasy sports for bygone games, right? From the past. We still have the data. Still a lot of randomness, a lot of crazy stuff happens. So it turns out you kind of make the same decisions that you do with regular season fantasy when you're playing in the past. And the idea sort of came to me a couple of years ago. I had a terrible tight end on my fantasy team. I'm watching randomly some highlights from, I think it was Falcons versus Redskins or Commanders, excuse me, on YouTube. And Tony Gonzalez is going off. He has 100 yards and a touchdown in the first half. I'm just like, God, I want that guy on my team. I wish I could play with him on my team right now. And that's where the concept came from.
Very cool. How do you avoid sort of knowing exactly what? I guess you'd have to look it up, and there's no time to do that, right? Like when you're.
So you can actually look it up. There's two different game modes that we have, right? So we've got a league mode where you draft just like you would in a regular league with your buddies. And then we do a tournament, which is like DFS with best ball scoring. And so in both cases, you can look up everything you want. You know what happens at a season-wide level, but you don't know what week the game is going to choose to score, right? So out of 16 weeks, it's the luck of the draw, which is how it is in regular fantasy.
That's very cool. As a Dolphin fan who misses Dan Marino, I would I'm going to have to check that out because I would enjoy firing up his 48 touchdown season.
Oh man, that would be a gem. Well,
Yeah.
right now we go back through 2008. We are trying to negotiate a discount on seasons that'll take us back through the 50s. The earlier quote we received was we got a 6-figure quote to get data going back to the 50s, and I don't have that much money lying around, so TBD. But we're gonna get there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, how long has the postseason game and site been active for, Kojo?
Yeah, so we did a light beta last summer, but this summer was the first time that we ran weekly tournaments, like every week. And we're done for the year. You know, everybody's got to focus on regular season fantasy right now. Obviously, I'm banging out mock drafts right now, a couple real drafts the weekend. I'm sure the same for you guys. But we'll be back in probably late December with the league mode beta, and then starting in spring 2024.
All right,
Excited for that, man.
So, Kojo, this next question doesn't come from me. Paul wrote it, so don't get mad at me. I'm just the messenger, but was the postseason your way of recovering from the debacle that was Super Bowl 51?
I should have prepared for this, right? It's only fair. You know, I'm not going to lie. I've started postseason tournaments a couple of times. It happened to be 2017 NFC playoffs or NFC South. And I'm just looking at the stats and I'm like, we were the best team. We were the best team.
I'll tell you something. I had Matt Ryan as my fantasy QB that year. Got him like on the cheap, and it was beautiful for that whole season. He just went off.
It's beautiful until it wasn't.
Yeah,
yeah. I remember watching that game and just thinking, I couldn't believe it. It was nice to see the comeback, but then I was like, I can't believe they came back, and I can't believe they actually won it. You know, I'm not trying to rub it in or anything, but I just couldn't believe it.
It's all good. You know, at this point,
as a Dolphin fan who was tired of getting stomped by the Patriots, that Super Bowl and the one against the Seahawks were like, come on. Just close the door, finish the job. Like,
we let you down.
Like a superhero movie where like they have the villain down and like they don't put the bullet in his head, and like they're like, all right, we beat him, and then he's not dead.
Talking yet. Is how it always goes.
Yeah.
So Kojo, we were talking pre-roll, Kojo, and I know you live in Atlanta, Georgia, but how did you become a Falcons fan?
Yeah. So growing up, I wasn't really a big American football fan. My dad is from Ghana in West Africa, so soccer was obviously the big sport, and I played baseball a little bit, so I was a big Braves fan. Certainly, I had some interest when the Falcons went to the Super Bowl in '98, right? But I think what really did it was Mike Vick, right? And the way he just kind of electrified the city. You could not want to watch.
So you may have answered. You may have answered my next question. Thinking back, the Falcons have not exactly had the most, all pros and Hall of Famers. They've had some truly great players. Julio Jones, Deion Sanders, Mike Vick. Who's your all-time favorite Falcons player?
Yeah, I think it would have been Vic, easy shoe-in, if nothing else, because of, playing with him in Madden 04, right? How great was that?
Yeah.
But
he was a cheat code, right?
It was unbelievable. You literally had to be like, you can't use the Falcons.
Right. But
yeah, I think, the sting of the way it all ended, I think that was like my freshman year of college, right? And it was bad, left a bad taste in the mouth. So I'm gonna go with Roddy White. I loved Roddy.
A good one.
He was just the epitome of he went through the rough times with us, right? Like I think his rookie year was the year that Vic got busted, and then also was there, for the good times, right? The final ride. So
Roddy and Julio was, for a while there, probably the best wide receiver tandem. Maybe Moss and Carter were better, but they were close.
What a duo, yeah.
Yeah, that duo doesn't get mentioned enough as far as like being talked about among the great wide receiver duos in NFL history.
Yeah, I think if they could have made the Super Bowl in was it the 2012 season? I'm trying to remember when the Falcons had a lead in the second half against the Niners, Kaepernick and the Niners, and they let it slip away in the NFC Championship game. If they had made that Super Bowl, I think the narrative of Roddy and Julio looks really different.
Yeah, you're probably right.
So. So, we're sticking with the Falcons here, Kojo. What are your expectations for this Falcons team heading into the season?
Yeah, I think they sneakily built a really solid defense. This roster doesn't have a lot of holes on it. But with that said, it doesn't have a lot of I don't think it has that much offensive depth. So, you lose one or two key guys and you could be in for a world of hurt. It's a really soft schedule. So I wouldn't be surprised if the team wins 10 games. I wouldn't be surprised if the team loses 10 games. I think they'll kind of land somewhere in that middle.
What are your thoughts on Desmond Ridder? Sorry, Dave, before we get to the next question.
Paul. I think I like Ritter's personality. I like the way that he approaches the game and practice. But I just haven't seen a lot of consistency from him yet in terms of nailing kind of the routine throws. He's definitely had a couple of plays where you're like, okay, all right, we might have something. But, just hit the routine once regularly,
I got you.
I mean, you mentioned they could get to 10 wins this year, and the good news is, last year 10 wins runs away with the NFC South. It was, one of the historically bad divisions. And as you said, the teams in the NFC South have easy schedules this year compared to last year. Part of that is that they get to play each other, and none of them are that good, but they were also playing the AFC South, which is also not a particularly strong division. And, this is as Paul said, this is our last of the 8 division breakdowns for fantasy football, and we'll dive into that in a second. And we kind of saved the best for last or the worst for last. I don't know, but this is an interesting division because teams that are trailing in games, and when these teams play each other, you might get some points. It's an interesting division to think about because with Brady gone, Derek Carr is the only proven quarterback in the division, and he's on a new team after kind of, things went bad at the very end in Vegas. And then you've got, basically, rookies or Baker Mayfield starting everywhere else. I mean, Ritter's not a rookie, but it's his first year as a starter. Bryce Young,
4 games last year.
And, so it's going to be interesting. I think, you can make a case for all four teams in the division to win the division. I think maybe not Carolina, but the other 3, I think you can. So I'm interested to see what happens with this division, or maybe Tampa. You can't. I don't know. They all could. Nothing would surprise me in this division. So let's jump in now. We'll talk some fantasy and go across the 4 teams. We'll stick with Atlanta. I was one of those people who last year paid a little too much for Kyle Pitts.
Oh no!
Was one of many who got burned. I mean, it was almost a relief when he got hurt because I could finally stop putting him in my lineup and hoping he got more than 2 for 23.
Right.
His price this year is much more reasonable. So my question for you is, he's going in like the 6th, 7th round. I'm talking about, season-long redraft leagues now. Are you in or out? Is that a fair price?
I think it's fair-ish, but I'm still out.
Me and you, Kojo, I am too. I'd like to hear your reason.
Yeah, and I think I'll probably talk a little more about Pitts later, but they kept Michael Pruitt, who actually had the most touchdowns of our tight ends last year. And then they went out and got Jonnu Smith, right, who we all know came from Tennessee with Arthur Smith. And they have big plans for him. And then last but not least, Bijan Robinson, right? Short area target in the passing game. Tight ends also kind of short area target. It's enough noise for me to back away.
Yeah, I agree. And I also, they were one of the most run-heavy teams in the league last year. And, that's going to be Ritter's best friend this year is that 3-headed attack with Patterson and Algier behind Robinson. So I'm just scared of the volume. I mean, he'll make some big plays, I'm sure, but I'm just scared of the volume.
Yeah, he'll definitely have weeks where we all see, oh, there's the guy. But how do you know when those weeks are going to be?
Exactly. You know, another big piece of the Falcons offense is Drake London. He's heading into year 2 here at Kojo. One narrative about the Falcons, one worry as far as fantasy goes, is the Falcons being so run heavy. Do you think there's enough passing volume for Drake London to, maybe be a fantasy wide receiver too?
I do. I think he sneaks in there. I don't think it's because there's like a big passing pie, but more that it's kind of a narrow tree, right? So I think London, last year he had over 100 targets. He was a little shy of 1,000 yards. I think he does break that 1,000-yard mark this year, give him a handful of touchdowns, and I think he sneaks in there.
Yeah.
So we got to.
Where do y'all have him?
Oh, London for me. I have him as a borderline wide receiver too. I think he'll get touchdowns. I think when Ritter throws touchdowns, he's got the best chance to get them. I think the volume will probably be a little low. So I think if you draft him, you're hoping for, 8, 9, maybe even 10 touchdowns, and that's the way to return value. What do you think?
Be a big season. Personally, I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit higher on the Falcons offense. I think they'll be a little bit more maybe pass heavy. Maybe it's because I believe it more in Desmond Ritter, thinking he's a smarter player and giving a little bit more credit to Arthur Smith than most people. But I have him as a top 20 guy personally.
Okay.
Yeah, see that?
I'd love to see it.
So the most anticipated running back since Saquon Barkley, I would say in the last 5 years, right? Like top 10 running back, third straight year the Falcons have used the top 10 pick on a skill position player.
How insane is that?
Bijan's going in the back half of round 1 in season-long drafts, and typically as the third running back off the board, third or fourth, I would say. So how do you see his rookie year playing out, and which running backs would you take ahead of him? Let's say half PPR, to keep it simple.
Yeah, I think he's in an almost can't, assuming health. I think he's in an almost can't miss position, right? We've seen rookie running backs come in who were drafted in the first round, come in and be excellent year after year after year. And this is an offense that, you find the rushing stat last year, the Falcons were near the top of it, right? And I think nothing's really going to change from that perspective. He is going to mix in with the other backs that are on the roster, but I think there's going to be more than enough rushing volume, and then you toss in some passing. I think as far as the running backs I would take over him, really I would just take Eckler and McCaffrey, but I wouldn't be mad at you if you chose to take a Saquon Barkley or even a Nick Chubb, who I personally think is going to have probably his best year yet.
I would agree with that on Chubb for sure. It was kind of surprising to see, you look at that Atlanta team and all the holes, if you want to call them that, they needed to fill. They take Bijan Robinson with the number 8 overall pick, and you look at a guy like Tyler Algier, who had over 1,000 yards last season as a rookie, and he's kind of being picked as a sleeper this year. And of course, you've got Cordell Patterson, who I know he just recently got injured, but he showed some signs of life his first year with Arthur Smith as well. How do you see the touches in that backfield breaking down?
Yeah, that's a great point. And frankly, I was actually at the Hawks versus Celtics playoff game getting stomped when they drafted Bijan, and I was so angry because to your point, we had other needs. Certainly, I've grown more excited about him as the buzz has continued. I think last year there was basically a 60-40 split, right, between Algier and Patterson, and this year I would imagine you're probably looking at 55 to 60% to Bijan. In part because I think they're going to give him a lot of catches. So there's not so much need to give him, 80% of the rushing volume.
Right.
That probably then leaves Algier with 25, 30% and Patterson with whatever's left, which I don't know. Patterson was really good that first year, but we did see him slow down a little bit. So maybe he's better at more of a change of pace role.
Yeah. Good point.
So Kojo, you mentioned that name a rushing stat, and the Falcons were at or near the top last year, and that's true. And one of them was attempts. They had 559 rush attempts, which was one more than the Chicago Bears, and made them, the most. I don't know if they were the most run heavy by percentage of snaps, but they certainly had the most rushing attempts of any team. And that's almost 33 per game. So you think about that, that's really a lot of ground and pound, and it worked for them. They ran the ball well. Did you think that approach, part of the reason for that was Mariota was not fully healthy last year and was, sailing balls over guys' heads and really couldn't run the offense, I think, that Arthur Smith wanted to run. And I'm not beating up on Mariota. He did have an injury, and I think it did affect his mechanics. Do you think that the run-heavy approach changes some with Desmond Ridder now under center? And, do you think Arthur Smith has other things up his sleeve than what we saw last year?
I think it could have if we had seen kind of a more emphatic preseason from Ridder. And that's not to say that, I analyzed every snap or I'm a quarterback, guru or anything, but I think there's just enough question marks there that we'll probably see a continuation of what Arthur Smith has been known for, in Tennessee and so far in Atlanta, which is, hey, let's have a really good run game and let's be efficient with our passing. I think also the fact that, they kept a fullback on the roster, and they also intend to use Jonnu Smith in kind of a hybrid H-back or whatever role lends itself to that as well. I think it's going to be another run-heavy year.
Yeah. So let's move on to another team in the division. We're talking a little bit about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you look at the pieces on their offense. They have some pretty prolific receivers in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who have both been top 15 wide receivers for most of their time in Tampa Bay, especially during the Brady era. Now with Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask in town, what point are you drafting these guys?
If I can help it, I am not. And that has nothing to do with them. And it's just more to do with, looking at Baker's history with his receivers. It feels like when Baker has a guy with the brand name that it's a struggle. But when he can just show up and throw the ball to just dudes, then he's good, right? And I had DJ Moore on a team last year, and that wasn't fun, right? And then obviously we all remember when Baker showed up, literally parachuted off the plane onto the sidelines in LA. And he was great that one game, right? Because he didn't know anybody. There was no pressure. He was just free. Now he's going to be in Tampa where he's following the GOAT, right? That's pressure. He's got someone behind him who I think that the fans will kind of start chirping for if he struggles. That's pressure. And then, you've got Mike Evans, guy's never been under 1,000 yards. That's pressure. So, where Godwin's going, they're both going kind of in that 6th, 7th round. I kind of prefer running backs like Kamara or James Cook where Godwin is going. And then where Evans is going, there's some young wide receivers like Jahan Dotson and Jordan Addison. I'd rather take flyers on those guys. Yeah. So, obviously there's a price for everyone, but if I can help it, I'm steering clear of these two.
It's funny when you mention pressure because Baker Mayfield, he comes across as a very confident, borderline cocky guy, and we've seen him kind of break under the pressure. You would never think that would be the case.
It's odd. I don't know what it is.
Well, it's his fourth opportunity. So this is probably his last opportunity, I would think. As a starter in the league, he may be a guy who sticks around. Maybe his specialty could just be parachuting in late this season, and actually, they didn't win that game so much as the other team lost it. In some ways, it was incredible.
That's true.
Get a first down, and that never happens. So anyway, I want to talk about Rachaad White for a minute. Leonard Fournette's gone, and it's pretty much expected that he'll dominate touches for that team. Maybe he won't. Maybe he will. He's going in the range of it's kind of a running back rich part of the draft. Dobbins and Damian Pierce, Cam Akers, Alexander Madison. They're all kind of right around that same ADP. How do you like him as compared to those guys? And do you think he'll be the sort of bell cow in Tampa, or at least dominate touches in that backfield?
I do expect him to be the bell cow, at least early. I've been hearing the drumbeat kind of start going about Sean Tucker a little bit. I haven't made time to sit down and watch some of his preseason tape, but assuming Rachaad White comes out and handles business early, I think he can kind of hold Sean Tucker off at least for the bulk of the year. But with that said, that's an if, right? We've seen him have opportunities before and not be very efficient. As far as the other running backs in that range, I kind of like all those guys more than him. And again, that's almost just a reflection of I'm not sure what to expect from this Baker Mayfield offense here in Tampa. So yeah, I mean, Dobbins, smash Dobbins draft at that position. Dameon Pierce, I thought he was great last year, assuming he's, fully healthy. Happy to take him. Madison, we still haven't seen anybody of substance get added. I think they signed, they signed somebody today. I saw it on Twitter, but it wasn't like, oh goodness, there's that guy. Right. Do you guys remember who got signed?
No, I don't remember hearing that.
Minnesota.
I thought I saw something too, but it wasn't Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette. I know that.
Exactly. Yeah. So
I know they cut DeWayne McBride too. So.
Oh, DeWayne McBride. Wow. So yeah, I think Minnesota's all in on Madison. And then even Akers, he finished the season really hot last year. So I have no idea what to expect from LA, but I'd roll the dice on him earlier than I would Rachaad White. But I do think Rachaad White should be a pretty solid player. I just happen to like these other guys a little more.
That's fair.
Where are y'all at?
I think I'd rather have Rachaad White simply for the fact that I know he's going to catch passes. Dobbins and that Ravens offense, I don't know how many passes he's going to get, but, he could really help you out with touchdowns, obviously. Cam Akers, it's a small sample size. I don't know how to feel about that Rams offense. Hopefully it'll be better, but, with a healthy Matt Stafford, but he's getting older. He doesn't even know his teammates' names. So, how much work is he going to get? And then Dameon Pierce, man, I definitely would rather have – I think I'd rather have Dameon Pierce than Rachaad White, but I'm excited for the Texans team overall, but it's a rookie quarterback. They don't have a lot of pieces on as far as pass catchers go. So how much of a workload can he handle and how many scoring opportunities will he have? So it's an interesting bunch for sure.
Yeah, and I do think, everyone can replace an offensive lineman. I do think the loss of Ryan Jensen is kind of bad for that team. Mm-hmm. For Tampa, he's kind of like the anchor of that offensive line. And I think he's the one who makes all the line calls. I don't think that's good for Baker, and I don't think it's great for their running game because their line was kind of suspect last year. They really couldn't run the ball last year at all. No. So I think White's value, as you said, Paul, is going to be catching passes, assuming that happens. And look, I think both he and Godwin could see a lot of targets because Baker, is going to be looking to get rid of the ball quickly to safe throws, short area. So we'll see. I'm not like, I agree with you. I'd certainly like Pierce and Madison better. The others, I kind of feel they're sort of the same. And it's sort of, just pick who you're feeling good about. But I don't think that much differentiates the runners in that group. There might be some, I have to look, but there might be some receivers around that range that I just like better anyway. Kind of depends what you need at that point in the draft.
That's fair.
We did see Baker support Kareem Hunt as a pass catcher for years, so that's a good point.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm actually excited a little bit about Sean Tucker. I added him to one of my dynasty teams, but he looked good in preseason. I think he will eat into some of Rachaad White's workload.
Nice.
But another position that can be tricky to figure out, and it's like if you don't get one of the top four guys, it's pick your poison. It's tight end, and Cade Otton was somebody was a bit of a sleeper on the offseason, but he hasn't really done much as far as I've seen. Heading into the season, he's pretty much free in drafts. Is he somebody maybe you take a dart throw on?
Yeah, why not? I think my approach to tight end is pretty much always if I can get Kelsey or Mark Andrews, awesome. If not, then I will wait till the end and see who's on the board. So, yeah, I mean, I think we've seen Baker be really good with tight ends in college and a little bit in the pros, but not really consistently year over year, right? So I don't want to say that Baker's a guy who leans on his tight end, but at the same time, Dave, you just mentioned the offensive line, right? So those short area targets, getting the ball out quick, a little safety blanket, it's going to really matter. And we did see K. Dotton flash at times last year. He's got the skills, so why not?
Yeah. All right, let's move over to the Carolina Panthers, a team that is clearly rebuilding. They have a pretty good defense, but they're clearly rebuilding their offense. They gave up a lot to move up to number 1 to get Bryce Young, and that included giving up, probably their best offensive player in DJ Moore. Can they avoid being a bottom 5 offense this year? Does Bryce Young even have a chance to be decent in year 1 with sort of what's left, the pieces that are left there on that offense?
I may be alone on this, but I actually think they can. I think it depends on whether they try to play within themselves, right? Be honest about what they are. They're a team that needs to sort of play ball control and really help their young quarterback, or if they try to go out and light up the scoreboard, every week. But I think if they do play within themselves, they're bringing back the full offensive line at least once. I think their right guard is on PUP. He's recovering from a torn ACL. But, after 4 games, he should be back. And then that gives them an opportunity to really gel around that young quarterback. And they can just run the ball. They've got some veteran receivers. I think that can be not terrible.
Fair enough.
I guess that's better than bad, hopefully.
Yeah.
Somebody who's also kind of had issues with health is Miles Sanders, and he's already dealing with a groin injury, but looks like he might be ready to go for week 1. You look at his ADP and his situation. Are you buying it at that price?
Bro, I am terrified. Miles Sanders. Usually, if guys like running backs in particular have soft tissue injuries, hamstrings, groins, like I just kind of take them off my board if they have those in the preseason. But he had his so early that, like you said, he's pretty much expected to be good to go. But yeah, I mean, where he's at in the 4th, there's just so much talent there. I'd hate to swing and miss. If he slips, late 5th, now I'm interested because they only kept 3 running backs. I mean, it's Chuba Hubbard behind him and Blackman. I forget. It's just
Chuba Hubbard.
Yeah, so we saw those guys, last year and actually the year before that, and there wasn't a whole lot there. So, yeah, Sanders terrifies me.
Fair.
That's fair. What terrifies me a little bit are the pass catchers on the Panthers. They brought in Adam Thielen. He's on the wrong side of 30.
Yeah.
DJ Chark, who had the one big year or pretty good year, but hasn't really been able to stay healthy and is already dealing with some injuries this year. Jonathan Mingo, who's a rookie. Mm-hmm. And then for some reason, I believe they kept 5 tight ends on the roster, which has to be a record. Kojo, are you interested in any Panthers pass catchers, or is this just kind of a group to pretty much avoid?
I am weirdly interested in Adam Thielen. And interestingly enough, because of the tight end thing. So my girlfriend went to Alabama, and so she couldn't wait to watch Bryce Young's first preseason game. She came upstairs a little while and was like, "Yeah, he's not doing so well. He's only throwing to his tight end, Adam Thielen." And I was like, "Wait, Thielen's a receiver." But then I thought about it. Yeah, he's kind of at that age, like you said, wrong side of 30, but he's always been really good, like with running technical short area routes, getting open in the red zone. And so if he's going to run tight end-ish routes, and what we saw from Bryce Young in the preseason is he directed a lot of volume Thielen's way, then yeah, I'd be interested in throwing him on the back end of my roster as a 5th wide receiver, and maybe he can help me get through bye weeks or injuries. I had not checked to see how many tight ends they kept. If they kept 5 actual tight ends, that puts a hole in that that balloon. So
Yeah, I mean, for all I know, 3 of them are just blocking tight ends, or maybe one's a special teamer. But I did see that.
that's
Double check
interesting.
that, but I did see that 5 tight ends made the roster when they cut to 53. I'm guessing some of them don't really play tight end all the time.
Yeah, sure.
They're playing chess while the rest of the NFL is playing checkers, I guess.
There it
That's what
is.
Carolina's doing.
But yeah, there's not a lot of meat on that bone in the passing game. You're right.
One passing game that's interesting is maybe one player in particular is Chris Olave for the Saints. We saw he had a great rookie year. When you look at his ADP, I mean, how high is too high to draft him?
Honestly, and I hate to say nice things about Saints players because
Yes,
I love Olave. I think he's amazing. He can play really at every level of the field. I think 20 is probably too high. So I personally would take him over Jalen Waddle just because as much as I think Waddle is a fantastic player, we all have questions, right, about how durable is Tua and, what happens if he's out. And so I think that's enough for me to take a guy who's going to be a guaranteed one on his team over a guy who has to contend with A, Tyreek Hill, and B, possibly not having his quarterback, even though Mike White is there now to save the day. And then I also could see myself in some builds, depending on how my wide receivers are starting to look. I could see myself taking Olave over Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I also love. But I had Amon-Ra on my teams down the stretch last year. And I remember how it felt to get those 5 for 60 every week. It's like, this is great. You're not killing me, but I really need more than this. And you know how it is with fantasy. Sometimes that sour taste from the end of the year can kind of cloud your best judgment. So yeah, exactly. In some builds, I could see myself taking the upside of an Olave over the floor of Amon-Ra.
I had Amon-Ra last year in my main league, and it was even more painful than that because he led the NFL in getting tackled inside the 5-yard line. So a lot of those 5 for 60s could have easily been and one.
Yes,
TD, which saves the line. But anyway, I got Olave in the Scott Fish Bowl, which is a super flex. So obviously everything's down around at least because quarterbacks are flying off the board. Yeah. But I got him in the 5th round in that, and I just felt like I was stealing.
That's amazing value.
Yeah, I really felt like I was stealing. Like I almost took him in the 4th, but I needed a second quarterback, and I took. Yep. I took a quarterback there, and I was like, damn, I could have had Chris Olave, and I couldn't believe it when he was on the board.
Fell in your lap.
When he came back to me, and I was like, I ran to the podium. It's a slow draft. You have 8 hours. I think I took 8 seconds on that.
Go.
High on him this year, too. A guy who very quietly, in some ways, put up pretty big numbers in sort of limited starts last year was Juwan Johnson, and I think he's on a lot of people's sleeper list this year at tight end. He's the tight end on the Saints, not named Taysom Hill, he's the tight end who actually plays tight end.
Right.
Taysom Hill doesn't play tight end. It's like the all-time fantasy joke that he's listed as a tight end. But any interest in Juwan Johnson as a sort of a you mentioned before, if you miss on the top tight ends, you'll kind of wait to the end of drafts. I think he could be a guy who's like him and Tyler Higbee and a few other guys who you're like, I'll just roll with this guy, and if it doesn't work, I'll play the waiver wire.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely throw a dart at Juwan Johnson. I mean, he caught fire in the middle of last season. He's big, he's fast, he's got good hands. What concerns me is how many other tight ends the Saints have, right? So they brought Derek Carr's buddy, Foster Moreau, over, and he's a feel-good story, right? I mean, the guy beat cancer, in one off season. And then they brought Saints fan favorite Jimmy Graham back, and it wasn't a one-day sign and retire deal. So I don't know. I can see Juwan Johnson leading them in targets and catches for tight ends, but losing just enough touchdowns and just enough, volume that you never quite get the the bang that you expect.
Right. Well, I'm glad you didn't mention Taysom Hill when you listed their tight ends.
Oh yeah, no. I'm sure we'll talk about him in the running back section.
Yeah.
Another question about the Saints is, maybe not a question at position, but maybe a questionable move overall with the contract. You look at that, is the signing of Derek Carr. How big of an upgrade is Derek Carr for the offense, do you think?
Okay, it's an upgrade in my opinion, but it's like you go to holler at a girl and you ask for her number and she says, no, I'm not giving you my number. But then she's like, but I'll give you my Instagram, right? So it's still a no, but it's an upgraded no now, right?
Right.
That's about the difference, the upgrade, the way I look at it between Andy Dalton and Derek Carr. I mean, here are some stats. Let's see if you tell me who's who, right? So last year, 14 games, 66.7% completion percentage, 2,800 yards, 7.6 yards per attempt, 18 touchdowns, 9 picks. That was one guy. Here's the other guy. 15 games, 60.8% completion, 3,500 yards, only 7 yards per attempt, 24 touchdowns, 14 picks, right?
Man.
It's an upgrade. It's just not that big of an upgrade.
Yeah.
In my opinion. But I think the good thing is you can tell yourself a story with Derek Carr that you really can't tell yourself with Andy Dalton, right? Andy Dalton, he's kind of had his time, and he's playing out the string. Versus Derek Carr, we saw that like supernova season starting to unfold, right? And then he got injured. We've seen him support, 2 wide receivers with Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree in one season. And now, it's just time for a fresh scenery. And he's in there with an exciting young rookie and whatever's left of Michael Thomas. And you can tell yourself a story that there's enough left in the tank there for Derek Carr.
I like that.
So Kojo, I've been married 31 years, and when I was single, Instagram didn't exist. So I'm going to have to take your word for the analogy you threw out there about not getting a phone number, but getting an Instagram. Anyway, you mentioned Michael Thomas. He's played a grand total of 10 games in the last 3 years, and in the process has burned a lot of people who drafted him kind of hoping the magic would come back from those monster seasons that he had with Drew Brees at the end of the last decade, like 2018, 2019. Are we at the point where everyone should kind of just say no on Michael Thomas? Or, is it still you kind of look at it and like, oh, 8th round, 9th round, Michael Thomas. I know what he did, 5 years ago. What do you think about him this year?
Maybe I'm just a sicko, but yeah, Michael Thomas is there, and depending on how my build is looking, 8th, 9th round.
Give me another dating analogy.
Yeah, so Michael Thomas is that girl that you went on a date with once or twice. It was pretty good, and somehow you ended up ghosting each other and it just didn't work. Then you see her on Instagram or whatever, and you see the story. She's looking good, so you slide in the DMs. Maybe it'll work this time.
One more shot, right? You can never say no to one more shot.
This is pure magic, Kojo. I love it. Good stuff, man.
You mentioned the exciting.
My girlfriend's gonna hate me.
I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but you invited it, so
yeah, brought it on myself.
Hopefully, she listens to the show, man.
No doubt. She loves football.
Yes, sir. So you mentioned the exciting young rookie. I can only think you're speaking of Kendre Miller, running back out of TCU. And then, of course, the Saints have Jamal Williams. Kamara's, he's back, but he's suspended 3 games. And, of course, Taysom Hill, who's going to vulture some rushing touchdowns. Looking at that backfield, how do you see it breaking down, and who do you like best at ADP?
Yeah, this one is probably one of the more intriguing backfields in the NFL, in my opinion. The way I'm trying to tell myself a story about it is look at the season in thirds, right? So the first third of the season, obviously, Kamara or the first 3 games he's suspended, and then he'll probably need a couple games to ramp up, right? So give that first third of the season to Jamal Williams and maybe Kendre Miller as he's kind of ramping up. Then I'm frankly expecting Kamara to come in pretty hot, once he's ready and maybe have a little chip on his shoulder. But we've also seen Kamara start to slip, his rushing touchdowns, his efficiency over the last few seasons. So it wouldn't surprise me if he just doesn't quite have it. Meanwhile, Kendre Miller gets accustomed to the speed of the NFL game, gets ramped up, and last third of the season maybe is his.
Yeah.
And, of course, there's Taysom Hill, right, who he's going to pop up at least 2 to 3 weeks during the season. It's going to happen, so just if you don't have a tight end, slide him in there and, just
anything can happen with Taysom Hill, man.
Exactly. How are you guys looking at this backfield?
Oh, say again. Well, I'm gonna save what I think of this backfield for one of my answers to the upcoming questions. Paul, I don't know if you want to give any.
In best ball, I took a lot of Kendre Miller, not knowing what was going to happen with Kamara, but then I started taking, when the ADP was right, I started taking more shots on Kamara in best ball and things like that. But overall, I'd probably still, if I had to choose, I would take Kamara.
I'm with you there.
So we got a couple questions now across the whole division that we'll each give our expert answers to. Maybe they won't be expert answers, but we're going to try for the listeners out there. So we'll start with this one. Which player from the NFC South do you want on all of your fantasy teams? Kojo, you give yours first, and then Paul, and then I'll give mine.
Yeah, I'll go right back to Kamara. I mean, a 6th round ADP, right? He allows you to kind of do a 0 RB or a hero RB build and still feel like, hey, I've got a guy who can maybe carry me down the stretch with, that cupcake schedule that all these teams have and that chip on his shoulder.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to go with Miles Sanders coming off a top 15 season and a new contract. I like Sanders' potential workload with the Panthers and the rookie quarterback in Bryce Young. With the limited pass catching options in Carolina, I think Sanders will catch 40 or more passes this year.
So mine's kind of an obvious one, and you can't get him in all your leagues because he's expensive, and we talked about him before. But I really think Olave is going to smash this year. I think he ends up as a top 10 wide receiver. He's being drafted a little lower than that, and I think he'll deliver in all formats. I think, the only thing that was really missing last year was touchdowns. He only had 4. But like his metrics, like yards per route run and routes run and target, all that kind of stuff was really high, with Andy Dalton. And I think Derek Carr brings just enough of an upgrade. And if Michael Thomas is healthy, fine. It's another guy that defenses have to worry about. So I'll get as much of him as I can. And I think Chris Godwin, especially in full PPR at the price he's going, I could just see him getting like 130, 140 targets this year from Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. Yeah. So I don't mind him as like my wide receiver. He's a guy who's been really good when healthy for really the last 4 or 5 years and is just a target hog. So I don't mind getting him at the price he's going at.
I think that makes sense.
So, one of the worst parts about fantasy is picking a guy and him busting. Kojo, which player from this division do you think is going to be a bust this season?
Yeah, so I told you we were going to circle back to Kyle Pitts, right? And
wow,
and I hate to say it because Kyle is a great guy, and I from what I can tell, he's put in a lot of work rehabbing this off season, but it just feels to me like there's so much stacked up. We talked about the other tight ends. We talked about Bijan taking some of the short area targets. We didn't talk about the MCL injury, right? So this is something that we see tight ends, get a little MCL sprain and, they're back in a couple of weeks sometimes. Throw a brace on it and you're good to go. Kyle Pitts had surgery and he still showed up, for the start of off-season activities wearing a big bulky brace. Big bulky brace. I can talk. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about Ritter, right? And we've already had a couple of highlights where or lowlights, I guess I should say, where Ritter is throwing behind or above Kyle Pitts, and it just gives you flashbacks to last year. So,
Yeah,
How about you, Dave?
I was tempted to say Pitts also. I wrote down two names, and he was one of them. And the two names I wrote down in my main league were my biggest disappointments last year were Kyle Pitts and Alvin Kamara. And I'm going to go with Kamara here. And there are a bunch of reasons for it. And I know 7th round for him is so cheap compared to anything in the last 5 seasons. But, missing 3 games is a big deal. Fantasy season isn't that long, and especially in head-to-head leagues, like you got to get wins, and 3 games is a lot. They've got 2 touchdown vultures on the team, not 1 but 2, between Taysom Hill and Jamal Williams, who led all running backs in rushing touchdowns last year. They drafted Kendre Miller. I think Kamara will catch plenty of passes, so in a full PPR, maybe he returns some decent value. He lost explosiveness last year. I don't think he had a single carry longer than 30 yards. I just don't know that he'll get enough touches to be, I could just see a lot of frustration. There was frustration last year. He had a bunch of games where he had like 130 yards but no touchdowns, 130 total yards. I don't think he'll be terrible, but I just don't want a part of that again this year. Paul, how about for you?
So this guy, he's probably not being taken too much in 1 QB leagues, but majority of the leagues that most of us play in, I'd imagine, are super flex. And my guy is Bryce Young, who's currently going in drafts as a QB 11 ahead of guys like Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa. He has an ADP of 31. We talked a lot about his weapons. I don't think they're good enough to help Young put up QB 11 numbers this season.
I have not seen his ADP that high. I didn't realize that he was like getting ahead of guys like Aaron Rodgers and Geno Smith and Danny Dimes. I certainly, if that's true, I would not take him there either. I thought he was lower than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to draft a rookie quarterback that finishes a QB1, you want to feel confident that he's going to run a lot. And at Bryce's size, I don't think you can be confident in that. So that's high.
Yeah, very high. I was surprised.
Let's talk about sleepers. That's more fun than talking about busts. Kojo, who's your favorite sleeper in this division?
Yeah, so pending me checking on the which tight ends the Carolina Panthers kept, I'll circle back to Adam Thielen because, again, I think you can throw him on your roster as a wide receiver 5 or maybe even later. And then you get into the middle of the season, if you've got some hard luck, it's a guy who maybe can give you 10, 12 PPR points to get you through that rough patch just by being a little safety blanket for Bryce Young, running shifty routes in the end zone, get cheap touchdowns. So I like Thielen there.
It's a good
Paul,
one.
how about you?
For me, I'm going with my guy, Sean Tucker, Tampa Bay running back. He had a strong preseason, and he's fighting for that RB2 spot up for Tampa Bay, which is currently up for grabs. He's got breakaway speed, and, man, I think he'd be a nice compliment to Rachaad White. How about you, Dave?
Well, I got two names written down on my sheet, Adam Thielen and Sean Tucker. So great minds.
Hey.
Look at us.
And I don't have that much to say that you guys didn't already say. I mean, Thielen, it looks like he's going to run a lot of routes out of the slot. He's traditionally, for most of his career, been an outside receiver. I think he can win from the slot. I think he's crafty. He's always been really good in the red zone, and I think he's just going to be Bryce Young's best friend. So and his ADP is so cheap. He's going in like the 13th round, and he's their wide receiver 1, presumably. If I can get any team's wide receiver 1 that late, sign me up. Exactly, and I agree.
Yeah.
Tucker. I guess there was an issue with whether Tucker was going to be medically cleared.
Mm-hmm.
He put up a lot of yards at Syracuse, and I think
touchdowns.
And touchdowns. And I think that he'll it may take a while. So he's a guy, stash on your bench and it'll be tempting to drop him, but maybe just wait because I think he will get an opportunity. And especially if Tampa's season blows up and, they're kind of in a rebuild, I think he'll get a decent opportunity. So my guys are your guys. Nothing original here.
Yes, sir. All right, Coach, I'm not sure how big of a bold take guy you are, but for the sake of this conversation, give us an NFC South bold take for the season.
Man, I'm not going to lie. This was the hardest question for me. I went back and forth. Where I finally landed was this. After, as we talked about, Dave, a couple of down years, right? Just 6 rushing touchdowns the past 2 years. Alvin Kamara is going to give us not 1, not 2, but 3 plus rushing touchdown games this season.
Oh, that'd be something else right there, sir. That'd be nice.
As long as they don't come against the Falcons.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, mine is more of a team one than a fantasy one. I think the Saints are going to win 11 or 12 games and kind of run away with the division. They, of all the teams in this division that have easiest schedules, they have the easiest one. In fact, they have the easiest schedule in the NFL. And I was looking at their schedule, before we came on the air for the show, and I was like, when are they playing a hard game? There's games they're going to lose, but they're going to be favored or no more than a 3 or 4 point underdog in like their first 10 or 11 games, except for maybe one game in there. And I think Carr is enough of an upgrade over what they had last year. They do have a decent defense with a good secondary and a pretty good pass rush. And they got all those running backs. Not a big believer in Dennis Allen, but I think they're the class of this division. I think the Falcons, if it's not them, it'll be the Falcons. I think they're really well coached, and they're just going to win ugly. They're going to just beat teams by running them into the ground. And that's mine. And I think as part of that, I think Olave, top 10 receiver, and Carr, like kind of a borderline fringe QB1, maybe finishes around QB 11 to 13, something like that. Paul, what's your bold call for the NFC South?
All right, Coach, I think you're going to like this one, but my bold take is Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier, and Desmond Ridder will score a combined 50 TDs in 2023.
Let's go.
How many?
50.
Let's go.
I'm realizing now I don't know why I had Algier in there instead of Drake London, but initially I had it as like a combined rushing touchdown. Too late to change it now, but I'll stick with it.
Hey, I'll take it. I've got Algier on one of my dynasty teams, so let's get him a few TDs.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, hey, Coach, man, I appreciate you sharing the time. It was a great conversation. Before we get you out of here, let the people know what kind of content you're creating and where we can find it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. Great conversation, a lot of fun. So again, we're Play PostSZN everywhere. It's all one word. PostSZN is PostSZN. Again, we are done, hosting tournaments for the 2023 fantasy season. We're just going to enjoy fantasy like the rest of y'all, and so we'll be basically just serving as a megaphone, right? So amplifying great content like the podcast that y'all have. Probably start to ramp back up in maybe December when we'll do some beta testing of our league game mode. So if you'd like to be involved in testing that, just follow us on your choice of social media, and we'll let you know when it's out.
Yes, sir. Dave, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter and the content they can expect from you.
Sure. Kojo, it was really fun having you on. I really enjoyed our conversation tonight, and I wish your Falcons the best of luck this season.
Thanks.
I am at Pigskin Papers. Website is thepigskinpapers.com. I've pretty much wrapped up my preseason draft content because I think most people have drafted by now, or they're drafting in the next couple days. And then during the season, there'll be weekly fantasy content, typically a waiver wire column at the beginning of the week, by the end of the Monday night game, and then a kind of a start-sit column usually by Thursday morning. Paul, where can people find you, and what content can they expect?
Yeah, guys, so my content will be on Twitter. As far as the Cowboys content, we stream every Monday night, and in season we'll be streaming on Monday nights and Wednesday nights. And I will pick up the writing pen probably next week, or if not week 2, to do some fantasy content. And you can find that at King Fantasy Sports, and you can find me at Paul_Ryan15 there on Twitter /X. Guys, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see y'all next week.